You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 80. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here. I hope you are having a fabulous, fabulous week. It is lovely here in Vancouver. We're having kind of a warm, rainy, gray, cloudy day, and it just feels cozy. So wherever you are, I hope you are enjoying the weather that you're having. If you are in the US, you're about to have your Thanksgiving celebration. So it'll be belated, but happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Here in Canada, we celebrated a few weeks ago, and I continue to be grateful. I love these holidays that encourage us to think about all the things that we are grateful for that we have in our lives, all the things that we've worked so hard to have, and just really enjoying the things that matter most to us. And one of the things that I really appreciate is all of you, each of you who is tuning in every week, who is listening to this podcast, those of you who are sharing feedback with me. I just love to hear it. And I'm just excited to share this week's episode with you. It's all about power. Power, power, power. Something that we don't talk about very much. So I'm just going to say that word, power, 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 to get everyone excited about talking about this topic. Is it taboo? I don't know. But certainly it is an area where a bit of discussion can go a long way. Now, before I do that, I did want to mention, as I have been for the past few podcast episodes, that I'm beginning a membership program starting in January, and I continue to flesh out the format. I know exactly what I want us to be covering in the new year, really, starting in 2023. I've got themes for each month. These are themes that are the topics, the issues, the challenges I see most commonly among the lawyers that I work with. And I want to bring this work to more of you. I want us to do this in community. I want us to do this over the course of a year together and really experience the power that comes from taking control. And so if that's something that interests you, please do reach out to me. More information is coming, and I would love to have you join me. So power, 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 power. Today we're talking about power. I'm going to, first of all, talk a little bit about power and our relationship with it. And then I'm going to share some ideas. They're actually games. I'm super excited to share them because I've had a lot of fun putting together this podcast episode for you. And those games are going to help you with your relationship with power. So the reason I think this is an important topic for all of us to talk about and to talk about more openly is that power isn't something that we often talk about. And for many of us, we haven't actually consciously defined it or defined our relationship with it. If you think about the relationship that you have with power currently, you might describe it as awkward. Maybe it is dysfunctional. Maybe it's non-existent. Now, conversely, you may be one of those people who has a very healthy relationship with power. And if that's you, then I would encourage you to listen to today's episode and use it as a way to refine your relationship with power. I think you'll still find the games that I suggest to be quite helpful because number one, I think the concepts are very applicable. And number two, I think when we make a game out of something, it becomes more appealing. You can see it more in your practice and you'll understand what I'm saying when we get there. But for all of you, I think no matter where you fall on the spectrum, whether you're in the position of having no relationship with power or you've got a very healthy one, wherever you fall on that spectrum, I think you'll find that there's a lot of benefit in thinking about how you relate to power. And that's what we're going to do today. So I think a lot of us shy away from power. I think a lot of us have negative associations with power. I did an episode not that long ago, episode number 74, where I talked about authority. And authority is almost a euphemism for power, right? It kind of is power, but without actually uttering the P word. And that came on the heels of a coaching conversation I had with a client who was really reluctant to assume her authority, because to her, authority was equated with authoritarian, as opposed to authoritative, right? Somebody who stands in a position of expertise and guidance, seeing it more as this almost autocratic dictatorship type power that you wield that may not be welcome, that, again, sort of perpetuates that negative association. So now we're not even dealing with the euphemism of authority or whatever we want to call that. We're really talking about power. And in preparing for today, I thought it would be helpful to bring up some quotes. And before I do that, I invite you to think about power and your relationship with it. And if power was a person, how would you describe your relationship with that person? Is she somebody that you like? Is she somebody that you are spending any time with? Is she somebody who you dislike? Like, what is she like if power were a person? Now, the first set of quotes that I have to offer you are some of the more negative quotes. And the one that I'm going to start with is one you probably have heard before. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, I remember learning this quote back in high school. I think my mother might have shared it with me. And from that moment, these words have rested in the back of my mind. So anytime I see somebody in a position of authority or a position of power, and they exercise that power in a way that is harmful to others, it's like that little voice inside my head pipes up. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And maybe you have the same experience. Now, that quote comes from John Dahlberg Acton. I have no idea who John Dahlberg Acton is. I've never met him, never heard of him, never researched him. And yet his words have occupied that mental space inside my mind and have informed my relationship with power. And I say this because I would invite each of you to think about how the quotes, how the perceptions and descriptions of power that you've heard just in living your day-to-day influence you, whether or not you even know the source, whether or not it's something that you even accept as true. A couple more quotes along the same lines. Power is always dangerous. Power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. That's Edward Abbey. And we've got the greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse. And that is Edmund Burke. So imagine going back to our scenario where power is a person. You're sitting down at the table with power. She's right across from you. If this is what you believe to be true about her, how are you acting in relation to her? Are you wanting to initiate a conversation? Do you trust her? Are you concerned about how she's going to use her power in a way that is corrupt, that has the ability to influence you in a negative way, that's dangerous? So that's the first paradigm or the first way of looking at power. I've got a second cluster of quotes. I've got 3 clusters altogether. Now, this is interesting because I wanted to find some positive quotes about power. And the ones that came up in my search weren't necessarily power is great, we should all love power. It was a little bit more circuitous than that. So let me explain. The first quote is, creativity is power to connect the seemingly unconnected. That's William Plummer. The second, character is power. Booker T. Washington. The third, all forces in the world are not so powerful as an idea whose time has come. That's Victor Hugo. And finally, nothing strengthens authority so much as silence. So here what we're doing is we're looking at creativity, character, ideas, and silence. And we're equating those with power. And I think we can all think of those things as something that is perhaps positive, at the very least neutral. And if power is now being defined as character or creativity, ideas, and silence, if power, once again, were personified and sitting across from you at the table, how are you acting now in relation to her? Are you curious about her? Do you like her? Is she somebody who you might seek advice from? So you can see the difference between that first cluster of quotes and the second. The way that we perceive power impacts our relationship with it. Finally, the third cluster of quotes I want to read to you are power very much in relation to yourself. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. And that is Lao Tzu. Most powerful is she who has herself in her own power. Lucius Annaeus Seneca. And finally, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Alice Walker. The reason I think this is so important is because it brings power back to yourself. So going back to that example of power personified, imagine now that the person sitting across from you is you. This is your mirror image, your reflection, and she is powerful. How do you define your relationship with yourself when you are in that position of power? When you have basically taken for yourself, you have collected for yourself the power that you have, the power over yourself. And this last cluster is really significant to today's topic, and I'd invite you to think about it because most of the power that I'm going to be discussing with you is that power that you have over yourself. And establishing that relationship where you trust in yourself and where you go and bring that power back, especially where you've given it away. So if we take a step back and we look at why it is that we don't talk about power, why we may have a dysfunctional or a non-existent relationship with it, is that I think so many of us are socially conditioned as women to give our power away, to trust others. And we may not see it as feminine or ladylike or socially acceptable to be powerful. In our heart of hearts, we may want to have power. And then we go out and we discount our power in small ways. So an example that comes to mind for me is when you write an email, for example. And I'll often start an email, just a note to ask you for. And what I invariably find myself doing is going back to my draft email and deleting the word just. How often are you minimizing yourself by the language that you're choosing to use? Another reason why this comes up is that for many of us, we were never taught how to have power. I don't think it's really something that we teach in school. And yet, when we have it, we are able to exert it in ways that can do good, that can create impact. And for many women, especially if you're working in an environment that is primarily male, you may not have within your organization or outside of your organization, maybe even in your industry, you may not have people in positions of power who look like you or act like you. And that may make you feel like there's no model for you to follow in order to be powerful. And an area where I see this come up a lot with lawyers, and maybe I see this because I can relate to this personally, is as a woman litigator, I found, and clients that I speak with now sometimes find, that it's hard for them to find role models who practice in the way that resonates with them. There's a very male way to do it, or male in the stereotypical way, and then there's a different approach that maybe is more, again, stereotypically feminine. And I don't want to get into too much of a debate over what that looks like. But the idea here is that if you don't have leaders in your circle who are powerful and who are women and who you resonate with, you may find it very hard to figure out how you can embrace your own power. Now, you may be trying to solve this problem consciously or unconsciously by deciding maybe that you do not want power. Maybe you see it as something that is negative, something that is dangerous, something that corrupts. And power to you is simply something that at an unconscious level you've chosen not to have. And whether you know it or not, you're making decisions, you're acting in such a way that deflects power that you otherwise could have. Or you may want power. You may consciously go after it, and you think that if you work really hard, you will eventually attain the power that you want. Now, the problem here is that hard work doesn't necessarily make you powerful. And I think you can probably think of a number of examples in your mind's eye of people who work very hard, yet who do not have power. Another problem with this is that you may avoid power altogether, and you never really sit with the concept of power in order to develop a relationship with it. So again, going back to that example, maybe there's the table, power is sitting right there, and you're just avoiding her. You don't even engage in the conversation. Another challenge I see happening is that we give our power away. And I have a few examples of where this can happen, and I invite you to think about whether these apply to you. A big place where I see us giving away our power is in relationships. We want, and maybe you want, other people to do things for you. For example, you may want other people to make decisions for you. You may want somebody to tell you what the right course of action is on a file. You may want someone to tell you the right course of action in your career. You may want somebody to tell you what to wear, what to eat. I mean, on some level, you may be outsourcing your own power and placing it in the hands of somebody else. You may want somebody to give you validation. You may look to your boss or your client or your teacher or your parents or your spouse or your friends to tell you that you are smart, that you're capable. You're looking for that validation. You're putting that power that you could have over yourself and you're taking it and you're putting it in somebody else's hands. You may look to others to help you feel like you're in control by them doing what you want them to do. If you have kids, you know this firsthand. And if you're like me, you probably experience it every day. You realize how little power you actually have when you try to control someone else. And if you look at kids, for example, back when my kids were little, I did have power over what they ate. Initially, all of the power. And yet as they grow, they become more independent. They make their own food choices. And I have children that are now 8 and 10. It was somewhat recently Halloween. They come back with their Halloween candies, all of that. And I can tell you, I do not have very much power anymore over how much or when they eat that candy. I have some influence, but power is lost. And so if I look to them to behave a certain way in order for me to feel good about myself, I'm putting my power in the hands of my children. Same thing may hold true of your spouse, of your friends, of your parents even. Anytime you think they should do X, you are effectively taking your power and you're putting it in their hands. You no longer have that power. You might also see this at work, letting other people make decisions for you or abdicating decisions about the direction you want in your career. And I see a number of lawyers who have been facing this challenge where you've been happy for a certain amount of time reacting to the opportunities that present themselves to you. But then you find yourself in a position where you're no longer satisfied. And sometimes that's a result of having drifted. And so the exercise then becomes taking your power back. And it is something that sounds easy. In practice, I think it's a lot more challenging to actually implement if you're used to letting others make that decision for you. And we'll talk more about that as this podcast unfolds. So what you ultimately create in that situation is that you don't have as much power as you could have. Either you're not taking it, you're ignoring it, you're giving it away, and that can leave you feeling vulnerable. And if you think about what you do when you feel vulnerable, chances are you're not making the best decisions for you. You may be making decisions out of a place of scarcity. You may experience more fear because you don't see yourself as powerful. You think about a decision and you think about the consequences of that, and you feel like you would be powerless in the face of those potential consequences. You may find that you fall into a victim role. And you'll know that you're in a victim role if you are saying things like, it's not my fault that. Now, I don't mean to say that there are not situations where there is a true victim relationship, and I don't want to discount that. But if you find that you are expecting others to do certain things or that it's always someone else's fault, you may want to ask yourself whether or not this is a situation where you have given away your power and whether you need to reclaim that power. Again, that can be really uncomfortable. So if you are falling down that route, if you're not taking your power, if you are feeling vulnerable and making decisions from that place of impotence, then you're not doing what you could be doing, which is to create more impact. It might be to grow unapologetically. You might find that you are playing small because you're not assuming power. You are also not being an example to others, potentially. You may be capable of being that person. We talked earlier about not having those examples of power that you could emulate. What if that could be you? And of course, there's the ability to influence others in a positive way through you exerting your power. So what I'm proposing here today is to start playing with power. And I'm offering 3 games. These are games that you'll probably recognize from your childhood. And we're going to apply them to you, your relationship with power. I'm thinking in your practice, and I'm also thinking in other areas of your life, because the way you do one thing is the way that you do everything. So chances are, if you're struggling with power or your relationship with power, it may be showing up in more than one place. So the first game that we're going to talk about is hide and go seek. And this is a game that I think we can all remember or all relate to. If you have kids, they might play hide and go seek. You may have played it as a kid. It was a pretty popular game when I was growing up. And just to kind of remind you, you can imagine a group of kids. I like to think of school-aged kids. Maybe you're in a forest. Maybe you're in a house with lots of rooms and kind of closets and furniture to hide behind. And you have one person who is the counter or the seeker, the person who counts up to 10 or 20 or however many seconds you give all of the people who are hiding. And everybody else hides. And then the person who's looking goes around and finds everybody. And that is the game, hide and go seek. So how it applies here is that you may be hiding your power in pockets of your life. So going back to some of the examples that I gave earlier, maybe you've given your power to your kids. I need my kids to behave so that I can be or feel like a good mom. I need my firm to make me partner so that I can feel successful at work. I need my boss, client, husband, friend to listen to me so that I can feel respected. And what happens is when you make the way you think, feel, and act dependent on the action of someone else, you give your power away. And notice what happens sometimes. So let's use your kids as an example. Let's say your kids misbehave. Do you misbehave? And the example that comes to mind for me here, and I think if you haven't experienced it, you've probably seen it. Imagine you're in the checkout line at a grocery store or at the mall, and there's a toddler, and the toddler's having a tantrum, and the parent is calm to a certain extent, and eventually the parent themselves starts having a tantrum. So what happens there? The kid misbehaves, so the parent misbehaves. This has happened to me. This may have happened to you. But you see what's happening here. The parent has lost their power to the kid. Or maybe it's, they don't promote me. You're thinking of work. They don't promote me, so I don't promote me. And I don't promote them. So again, you're placing your power, your decision to promote yourself, to promote your organization, to them in promoting you. And finally, going to that example of the boss, the client, the spouse, the friend who isn't listening to you. What is happening there? Are you listening to them? Are you listening to you? So I would just invite you to think about what happens when you play hide and go seek and you start nesting your power in different pockets of your life. So if you want to win this game, you need to stop hiding your power in safe little pockets and go out and find it. You must be the seeker, and you get to go in your life and look at where your power is hiding from you. And a real practical way of applying this is to think about how you feel. Now, I know for myself, sometimes when I have conversations with somebody, I might feel uneasy about that conversation. And the way that shows up for me is almost a tightness in my chest. Sometimes I feel a little bit incomplete, if that's something that you can relate to. And what I've started thinking about, because I've really been thinking about this concept of power and this game of hide and go seek, is it's almost as though I've given my power out. I've turned to somebody and I'm looking for them to approve of me. I'm looking for them to tell me something is okay. And that I can tell is me giving away a piece of power. So if you can relate to that, then the exercise becomes, how can you bring that power back? How can you become grounded and whole with power intact? What I would also invite you to do is to think about situations where you may be prone to giving away your power. And there may be people or situations that you know are triggers for you. You may have somebody in your life where you would describe them as, I don't like that person because I don't like who I am when I'm with that person. And what I'd invite you to think about here is, number one, is there someone in your life who is like that? Is there a situation in your life that is like that? Because what I'd invite you to think about here is whether or not it actually has anything to do with them. And what if you're giving them your power? What if they don't actually have that power over you? What if you could be around that person and still be who you are? Another way of looking at this, and this is kind of a simple example, but imagine you're trying not to eat sugar. And so you keep all the cookies out of the house. And it's easy for you to not eat sugar when there's no cookies in the house. But you want to be the kind of person who can be in a house full of cookies and not eat them. You need to figure out how to become that person. You need to figure out how to bring the power back to you, not to the cookies. And the same holds true with people. Some people may be really difficult for you to get along with, whether it's opposing counsel, whether it's a family member, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a client, whoever it is you find it's challenging for you to be yourself, your best self. Those individuals, those situations are great testing opportunities for you to figure out how you can hold your power even in those difficult situations. Because when you give your power away, that's when you're going to start to act in a way that you don't like. It's not in alignment with who you choose to be. So what I'd invite you to do here is to look around and just see where it is that you've been stashing your power. And then your job is to go and take it back. It means you'll probably be having some awkward conversations, and that's okay. The second game that we're going to talk about is Tag Your It. For many of you, this is probably a game that you played when you were a kid. I used to play it in the schoolyard. I can't say it was my favorite game. I probably liked hide and go seek more. And the reason that I think it's important for us to talk about is because I think it's very common when it comes to power. So the game, of course, is there's a group of kids. One person is it, and that person goes around chasing all the other kids. And the idea is to tag them. And one of the ways you can play tag is you tag somebody and then they become it, or maybe you tag somebody and then that person ends up out. And the idea is to tag all the people and everybody goes out. And the reason that I think it's important for us to talk about this game and how it applies here is that the game is based on chasing. And when you apply this to your relationship with power, the analogy here is that you are always chasing it. And ask yourself what happens when you chase something or someone. Chances are whatever you're chasing will start to run. They may be a bit scared, especially if they can't outrun you, and they may struggle a little bit when you catch them. And when you catch them, chances are they'll resist and they may resent you for keeping them captive. And so ask yourself where you are chasing in your life. Where are you chasing power? Where are you telling yourself you'll be happy when you win the trial, close the deal, get promoted, get married, have the kids, buy the home? As long as you're chasing, you are coming from a place of lack and scarcity. And I'd invite you to think about the emotions that you have when you're coming from that place. When you're chasing, chances are you feel urgent, rushed, desperate, tired. And what happens when you actually finally catch the thing that you're chasing? And my guess is that you have a momentary sense of satisfaction. I talked about this in episode number 3, going back to the joyful practice. Again, builds on the work of Sean Achor, an American psychologist who studies happiness, that when you make happiness dependent on attaining some goal that's outside of you, then when you get there, you may experience that momentary sense of joy, but it's going to dissipate if that's where you've placed the emphasis. And so here, if you're putting your power, if you're saying, I will feel joyful when, I would be happy when, again, you're taking that power, you're putting it at a distance, and then you're going to chase it. If you want to win this game, you must change your strategy. Instead of chasing, what if you were able to draw people toward you? And a quote came to mind as I was preparing for this podcast episode, and it's a quote by Maya Angelou. And she said, "Pursue the things you love doing and then do them so well that people can't take their eyes off of you." So think about that. Instead of chasing, what can you do better than anyone else that will have them come to you instead? And what will be different when they come to you instead of you chasing them? Where is your power here? It is within. Imagine what that would be like. You would then become like a magnet. You would have a gravitational pull. And when you attract others to you, when you attract opportunities to you and draw them in instead of chasing them, you get to sit with your power. And when they come to you, they come and they sit and they stay. They're not running, they're not fleeing, they're not resentful. They want to be around you. They're no longer running. So the exercise here is to change your strategy. The third game that I'm going to mention here is Pin the Tail on the Donkey. Again, a popular childhood game. Now, if you've never played Pin the Tail on the Donkey before, it's a game that's often played at children's birthday parties, and it involves having a poster of a donkey, and the poster will usually have a donkey and their bum. And everyone will line up and everybody gets to have a tail with a little pin on it. And when it's your turn, someone will put a blindfold on you. They'll spin you around a few times so that you can be disoriented. And then your job is to pin the tail on the poster. And whoever's tail ends up closest to the donkey's bottom wins. That is the game. So how that applies here? Well, if you take a step back, you might ask yourself, what is happening, right? You're born into this world. You have your family of origin. You have the social structures, the societal expectations and norms and beliefs that are shaping the world around you. You are taught how to speak, how to think. You may be expected to follow a certain path. On some level, you may find that the blinders are on. You may feel like you're being spun around in all different directions, and then you're told to find the way, right? There's a path, there's a goal, there's a tail to be pinned on the donkey. And when you do that, you will have success. Now, you may be playing some version of pin the tail on the donkey that works for you. You might find that there is so much joy and excitement to be found in winning the game that you don't really care that what you are doing is pinning a tail on a donkey. But it may be that the game itself doesn't really align with your desires and it may not be who you are. So I'd invite you to ask yourself where it is that you may have given your power away, where you may have been blindfolded, not physically, but in some ways blindfolded and spun around and told to follow a certain course that just doesn't agree with you. It could be that you are one of those people that has the job, has the home, has the husband, has the kids, has the vacations, has the status. You may have all of it, and yet you feel like you're somehow disconnected with what you truly want. And it may be that what has happened here is you've given your power away to the game. You've got the tail, you've pinned it on the donkey, and yet you're not happy. So if you want to win this game, you need to change the rules of the game. You need to take the blinders off. You need to stop spinning around and stay still long enough that you're not dizzy, that you can see clearly. You can see things for what they are, and you get to decide if you're going to continue to play. If you ask yourself where your power is in this game, your power is in your decision to choose to play the game or not. And again, I ask you to consider where in your life you might be using your power to pin a metaphorical tail on a metaphorical donkey. Someone told you to wear a certain brand of clothing, drink a certain type of smoothie, work a particular job, have 2.4 kids, vacation where everybody else does. Are you exerting your power to pin a tail on a donkey, or are you using your power to create what you want? So, just to recap, we've talked about 3 different games here. The first game is hide and go seek. So imagine you are playing that game. Where is it in your life that you may be hiding power? And your job now is to go and become the seeker and take your power back. The second game, of course, is tag your it. You need to ask yourself where you are chasing. Where does it feel like you're expending a lot of energy? Where does it feel like you're struggling? Where it's hard? Ask yourself, is it because you're going after something that you are chasing? And if you are chasing it, is there another way to do it where you can bring what you want toward you? What do you need to do? Who do you need to become to create that pull toward you instead of chasing what it is you think you want? And then finally, the third game, pinning the tail on the donkey. Do you need to rewrite the rules of the game? Are you running around with a tail, a donkey tail in your hand, trying to pin it on the donkey's bottom when it's not even a game that you yourself would choose to play? So if you do these things, if you start to think about your power in relation to these games and apply it, what you will find is you become so much more aware of your power. You'll become so much more aware of what it means to you, your relationship with it, how you're currently using your power, where you're giving your power away. You will become better and more confident at exercising your power, and you'll redefine your relationship with power. So again, go back to that example from the beginning. Imagine you're sitting at the table with power. How are you now feeling and acting in relation to it? The skills that will be required is number 1, you're going to need to have a willingness to play the game for yourself. What this means is you're going to need to stop hiding behind others and stuffing your power away where you can't access it. And that can be difficult. If you're used to giving other people your power, it's going to feel really awkward when you start to take it back, and it may not be relinquished all that easily. Number 2, you're going to need to stop chasing. And that might feel uncomfortable too. If you're used to working really hard and pursuing, if you change your strategy, that too may feel really awkward. And 3, you need to stop playing someone else's game. And again, if you've become accustomed to letting somebody else call the shots for you, it might feel really uncomfortable when you have to take that over for yourself. So to play this game, it's not only a willingness to play the game, it's a willingness to be uncomfortable and a willingness to own the consequences of what happens when you do assume power, when you become the decision maker. Because now you can no longer blame somebody else or avoid or refrain from making a decision. You are now the one who is acting, and you in turn get to take responsibility for that. What you will create is unknown, really. Because when you're acting at your full potential, when you assume your power, if you haven't been doing that yet, we have no way of knowing yet just what kind of an impact and influence you will be able to have. And I would invite you, if you haven't listened to it or you haven't listened to it recently, to go back to my podcast episode 65, where I talk about why you must close the confidence gap. And what I say there is that the reason that you need to close the confidence gap is because when you feel that confidence to move forward, you will create an impact beyond what you're creating currently. And the same holds true of your power. When you take your power back, you are going to create at a whole new level. So, my friends, please, as you go about your week, I would invite you to keep these games in mind. Hide and seek, tag your it, and pin the tail on the donkey, and ask yourself where the power is in the conversations you're having, in the choices you're making, the decisions you're making, and bring that power back and see what an impact that makes on you in your work and outside of your work. That is all I have for you today. And thank you for joining me. This has been such a fun episode to record, and I would love to hear how it has impacted you and what you discover about yourself, about your relationship with power as you go out into the world and apply this. You can reach me on LinkedIn, by email. You can go to my website. I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this podcast in general, please do go and give it a rating. It does help other people find it. And it helps to build the community that I am building, which of course is a community of amazing women lawyers and professionals just like you. So let's think about this. Let's think about what happens when you do step into your full power. And going back to those clusters of quotes that I referred to at the beginning of today's episode, that first group, really, when you step into your power, are you going to let that corrupt you? Absolutely. Is it going to be dangerous? Are you going to abuse that power? My guess for each of you is that the answer is no. So let's not let John Dahlberg Acton's words influence us in a way that causes us to step away from opportunities where we can actually create, when we can build. And if you look at that third cluster that I referred to before, right? Mastering yourself is true power. Most powerful is she who has herself in her own power. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So when you play these games, when you go and seek out and take back power that you've left in various places, consciously or not, when you stop chasing, when you stop playing games that may not be the game that you truly want to play, when you do that, you are reassuming that power for yourself. And it's from that position that I believe that what you will create will be something that is so beautiful, and only you are capable of creating it. And let's think about that middle cluster. Creativity is power to connect the seemingly unconnected. Character is power. All forces in the world are not so powerful as an idea whose time has come. Nothing strengthens authority so much as silence. So imagine you are now there. You are sitting across the table from yourself, and you have assumed that sense of power over yourself. What is it that you are going to create with your creativity? What is your true character? What ideas do you have whose time has come that you will bring to fruition outside of you? And what will you discover about yourself in the silence? So for each of you, thank you for tuning in. I'm so excited to see how this concept of power, how playing these power games, if you will, can alter the way that you see yourself, the way that you see yourself in relationship to power, and just what kind of an impact you can create when you decide that you're ready to own that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, for many of you, this will be review. This will be something you're already doing, consciously or not. And for many of you, this will also be an opportunity to see where it is that you have been giving away your power and steps you might take to start taking that back. So thank you for joining me this week. It has been truly a pleasure. And I would invite all of you to reach out to me. Let me know how this podcast is impacting you. If you are interested in working with me one-to-one, you are absolutely welcome to send me a note on LinkedIn. You can send it to me by email. If you're interested in learning more about the membership that's coming up, by all means, do the same. I would love to hear from you. And if this podcast has been helping you, I love getting messages from you. It is amazing. Let me know. And feel free to leave a rating and review wherever it is you download your podcast. It helps the algorithm that helps others just like you find this podcast. And I would love your help in doing that so that we can further build this community of incredible women lawyers. It is just such an honor to serve you and to connect with you every week. And thank you. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and very much look forward to connecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.